So in today's video, we're going to cover how to build a video transition that will actually show up under your video transitions in DaVinci Resolve 17.2. Let's get started. Welcome back. My name is Dave, and this is Fuzzee Tutorials. Okay, so let's take a quick look at a couple things here. First of all, as I was just showing you in my previous DaVinci quick tips about fixing your macros, we've got the macros directory opened up, and this is going to be important later in this tutorial, and we'll get into that when the time comes. And I built a default structure for creating the packages for you to install in your DaVinci, so it shows up in your effects library on the edit page. And this will come into play later. I've already done a tutorial on doing the package stuff, but I'll probably go into a little bit more of the nuances with it this time, since last time I wasn't able to show you working with the transitions because I hadn't built any yet at that point. So we'll get a little more detail on this a little later on. So let's fire up DaVinci. And as I had mentioned before on the last video, I just started working with this new mouse highlighter package that also is showing the actual mouse and the buttons I'm hitting. And you'll see it's showing when I'm using the wheel and which direction I'm running the wheel and clicking the button and so on. And it's also going to be showing you the different buttons on the keyboard that I'm hitting. So hopefully these are showing up for you and they're lasting long enough for you to catch it without having to constantly pause. So please let me know in the comments if you need me to adjust how long these keys are showing up. Okay, well, let's get rolling here. So I've already created a project where I was building this stuff in and tweaking and tuning. Now there are a few little things that you'll need to be aware of, problems that I ran into. So we'll sort that out. And if any of you out there actually have a little deeper knowledge than I do on parts of this, please feel free to comment, because I always welcome new ideas and thoughts and suggestions and knowledge. I'm no expert by any means. I'm just showing you what I know. One little thing you might be able to help me out with is, if you look down in here, I've got a whole bunch of favorites that I've set up, and these were previous versions of these tools of these transitions that I was playing with, and these got orphaned, and I can't find a way to delete these out of the favorites now that the originals are gone that they were attached to. So if anybody knows the answer to that, please let me know, and I'll make sure I mention you on the next video. Okay, so the first thing you would need to do if you're doing this from scratch is you would right click over here and you click on New Fusion Composition, and then you would type in the name. Make sure you put in how long you intend this to be. So for this particular transition, I'm working with 2 seconds at a frame rate of 30. Now, if you typically work in a different frame rate, then you're gonna want to set it up accordingly. And then you would just hit create. Now, I'm not going to do that because I've already got one, and it would take too long for me to show you building it all from scratch. So I'm assuming you've got a little bit of knowledge of working in Fusion. So we'll go into this first one here. Now, there's actually 2 of them here, and the only difference between the 2 is one is set up to be a transition for my ultra wide stuff, which you'll actually see on some transition areas in this video. I'll be using it there. But I'm going to show you the one for just standard 1080p. And as long as you're at 16 by 9, you can resize this to 4K without any issues. Everything will look fine. So we're just going to right click on this and open in the Fusion page. And then we got to get this stuff centered here. Okay, so it looks like there's a few things in here, but it's actually fairly simple stuff. So what we've got here, this is our primary background. And this, of course, is just setting the screen size. So if you're actually trying to do something in a non-standard format, you would need to go into image size, turn off auto resolution, and set this to your different screen size. So in the case of when I was making my ultra wide version, I had to go in here and set this to 3440 by 1440. But you have to turn this auto resolution off first. So there might be a different way to do that in a better way, but this is the way that I know how to do. So that's what I'm showing you. So in any case, and we would set this color to black and then set your alpha to 0. And that way it'll be transparent. And then you would drag your clip in. So we've just got a couple of video clips that are just stock footage that I grabbed off the internet. So you would drag those in here. You can name them whatever you want, but I like to keep stuff named and organized so that if I have to go back to something a little later, it's easy to know what I was thinking. And then of course you'll be creating, when you attach this clip to your background, it's going to create a merge. So you're going to merge these two in, and these need to be right at the beginning before anything else. And then what we're going to do is, if we take a look at our keyframes here, I'm doing the transition right at 30 frames. So the transition is actually going to be done here in the merge for moving them. Now, just as a little aside, when I first did this, I actually made a mistake that came back to haunt me later. I used global in and out to set where I wanted it in the actual transition package. And although it worked in Fusion, when you go to bring it into being a standalone transition that you're using in the effects library on the edit tab, then it doesn't work properly. So you can't use that method. You probably wouldn't have tried to do it that way anyway, but I just wanted to let you know about that little issue. So what we're going to do here is we want this this first clip to start off centered in the screen, and then we're going to set a keyframe there, and then we're going to move to frame 29, which is just one frame before the midway point. And then we're going to set another, oh sorry, it didn't go on 29 there. Okay, so you're on 29, then you would create another keyframe, and then we go to 30. Oh, sorry, frame. Yeah, we go to frame 30, and then we're going to move our center to -1, so it pulls it right off the screen. So that's just done in a 1 frame time, so it just immediately pops off of the screen. And then on our clip 2, on the merge, sorry, for clip 2, then we're going to set a keyframe for frame 30. And actually, you do need to set a keyframe at frame 1. And at frame 1, you're going to set it to -1. And then when you go to frame 30, you set another keyframe, but don't make any changes. And then you set another keyframe on frame 31, and then we'll actually move it to the center. So X will be 0.5. Now you don't have to do it left to right. You can do it up or down, you know, whichever way works for you. I'm doing it this way because, as you'll see, when you get into the transition, I've got a background that comes in and completely hides the first video and then reveals the second video. So if you don't want to use that method, you know, you can, and you're a little more advanced with Fusion, you can have these, you can do with these merges whatever you want to be moving them in and out, you know, if you're making real fancy stuff and not actually just hiding the videos. This just happened to be what I was building because it suited my purposes for some future projects, not just my normal YouTube videos. I'm going to be using these as stinger transitions for streaming, but that's a little ways in the future yet. Okay, so then the next thing I built was, of course, the that solid background here. And so you would drag in a background, and sorry I have to keep pausing for noise here, but okay, so you would drag in a background, and then we would set that background to whatever color you want. And at this point, it doesn't really matter what color you're using, because later on, when we're finished building, or when I finish showing you how this is built, then I'm going to show you how to create the macro so that you'll be able to adjust all these colors from the edit page. But that'll come a little later in the video. So here we're just going to set the starting color you want to start with. And then you're going to use a shape here for masking. So this is our rectangle. And this will get animated, of course. And once you decide where you want these animations taking place, then you would start a course on your, well, first you would start with in the middle here where it's going to wind up. Okay, so on frame 30 here, you would set your keyframe. And then you would set another keyframe where you want it to wind up when it's disappeared. In my case, it's 10 frames earlier, so frame 20. And you'll notice if we just scrub through this a little bit, you'll see that it's happening on a diagonal. So if you want to match those diagonals, then you need to set it at an angle. So if you look here in the angle, we set it at minus 29.3. And you'll note that if you use a different resolution, like I did for my ultra-wide version, then you have to change this angle so that it goes from corner to corner, of course. But for 1080p, the minus 29.3 seems to work okay. And then you can just make adjustments to the height. And you're also going to need to set your width at 1.25 so that it actually goes to the outside edges here. So if we were to change this to the default, then it doesn't go to the edges of the screen. So we'll set that back to 1.25, and that makes it wide enough. And once again, if you're using ultra wide, you'll probably have to adjust that a little further. So right at the very at the middle where you've set your keyframe, you're going to have a height of 2.0, and that's to make sure that it's going to go out to each corner all the way. And then, of course, when you get to your next keyframe, oh, I'm not okay, actually I do know why. For some reason, it's not right at 20, it's 20.04, and that's because I used the spline tool to actually create some curves in here so that it's just not abruptly moving in a linear fashion. So it comes in and out a little more smoothly. But if you're familiar with Fusion, you'll already know how to do that. And then you would go back to the next point where you're going to have it disappear again, and you would do the same thing. You would set your height to 0. And now for our 2 diagonal rectangles. So you're basically doing the same thing. You bring in another background, and you'll see, of course, I've named them appropriately to keep everything sorted out. And you would set the color you want to start with. And then you would, once again, drag in your shape. And by the way, you're piping this shape into the masking input for that background. And then once again, we're setting our angle at minus 29.3. So once you've got those set to, you're going to once again need your width of the 1.25 and set the height to however wide you want your line. And in my case, I set the corner radius to 0 because that's not even going to be visible on screen most of the time. And of course, our position is just default for now. And then we'll go back to our first frame here. And you'll see that we've got a center of minus 0.6 for X, and Y is 1.6. So that gets it off in this corner, and you'll see that your green line will show your diagonal position here. So if we just scrub through this a little bit, now you'll see that the animation just slides it in from the upper left down to the lower right. And you notice that the other one is going the opposite direction. We're still dealing with this one, so there's our next keyframe, and that's where it's in the middle. And then the keyframe after that is where we've moved it back off screen, and then we're back to minus 0.6 for X and 1.6 for Y. And then we're going to basically do the same for the other diagonal. It's just going to be opposite because we're bringing it in from the other corner. So if we go back to our first keyframe at the beginning, you'll see it's down off to the right here. And once again, we've got the width at 1.25, angle minus 29.3. And this time our center is 1.6 and our Y is minus 0.6. And then you go to your next point where you want it fully moved in at. And you're back to center and center. So 0.5 and 0.5. And you go to your next one, you set another keyframe there. And then you go to the very end and you make these setting changes again. So you're back to center of 1.6 and Y of minus 0.6. Okay, and then we've got our logo. So if we go to our, well, first you would drag in a logo. So in this particular case, I'm just using my own logo, of course. And then you need to pipe that through a transform into your merge. So on the transform is where we're going to be doing the actual animation. So we'll just, you're going to be animating it on size, or at least in my case, that's what I did. You can do whatever works for you. You could have it slide in from off screen, but I just have it starting at a size of 0 and then expanding. So let's just take a quick scrub through again just to show you what that looks like. So you see nothing happens until the lines are in place. And then the logo will start to show up and expand to the full size you want it. And then it stays there while your background shows up and covers the video and then goes away, and then it shrinks back down to nothing, and then those center lines disappear again. Okay, so to make all that happen, first you just go to the frames you're going to do this at. So first you bring it in, you get it centered and sized the way you want it. So that's actually going to be your third keyframe. And then you want to advance to the next keyframe that it's still going to be full size at. Set your keyframe there. Then if you go to your next keyframe, there's where you set it to size 0. And then if you go back to your first keyframe there, then you're setting it there to size 0. And you don't actually have to go and manually set the keyframe at those very endpoints. As soon as you make the size change, it'll create the keyframe for you. But I just tend to make it anyway because I get less mistakes that way. That way I'm not forgetting in another area where I do need to be setting it manually. So that's basically it for the main animation. So it's a pretty simple little transition. Now, kind of where the magic happens here, or where you have to kind of know a little more advanced knowledge, is when you're going to be using this as a transition, the first step of this is we're going to create a macro. And you have to do this stuff in the right order. You can't just kind of select all your stuff willy-nilly. You have to do it in the right order. So when you're creating a macro, whatever order you add these as you're selecting them, so you use your control key. So first you select your first one, and then you use the control key, and you would select them. And you have to do them in the correct order, or it may still work in here, but when you go to actually use it in your effects library, it's not going to work properly if you don't do it in the right order. But this also determines the order that it shows up in the macro editor to make adjustments to it. So the first thing that we're going to do here is, of course, select our main background. And the order you have to do this in is our clip merges, and then our individual graphics, top down to the bottom, one at a time, and then our transition and our merge. Now you do not select your actual media in and media out, because you want to make sure that you have inputs open for those. So when you drop them on your timeline, it'll automatically pick them up. And the same thing goes with if you're going to use a logo in this, and you want to be able to change that logo, you can't select that as part of this either. You need to have an input open for that in the macro. Now, some of you might think, okay, well, I'm only going to be using this for myself. I'm not going to make this so other people can use it and put their own logo in there. The problem lies in that there's an issue with DaVinci. Now, I don't know if it's intentional or if it's just a bug that they've never fixed. It's been around since version 16. It may have actually been around longer than that, but I only started in Resolve in version 16. I was hoping this is something they would fix. But when it comes to making, whether it's titles or transitions or whatever, if you bring in an actual photo, like a PNG file or a JPEG or something like that, it'll work within where you're building it. But as soon as you open a new project and try to actually drag in that effect onto your timeline, then it's going to give you a broken link, or a media not found. You'll just get like a red screen. So you have to just leave that open for an input, and then when you're going to use it in the future in other projects, you'll have to bring it into Fusion real quick, drag in your logo, and attach it. So, and I'll show you how that works in just a couple of minutes here. So just be aware of that. Now, I believe, although I haven't honestly tested it myself, But I believe if you bring in an SVG and use that it will keep that SVG embedded in the in your Fusion project for future use, so that it will maintain it. But I haven't actually tested that, so I can't give you that advice officially. But that's something you could play with on your own. But I do custom video editing for other people, so that's why I made this, so that all the colors can be adjusted and a different logo can be attached, so that I can use it for clients' videos as well. Okay, so we're going to start here. We've got our first one selected, and then we're going to hold our control key down, and we're going to click on these other ones one at a time, and making sure to skip those media in nodes, and you don't select your media out. And you notice as we were doing this, they were all appearing in here. So here from top down, they're in the reverse order you clicked on them in, but in the actual macro editor, they'll be in the order that you selected them. And then we're just right click on the last one that you clicked on. You can actually do this on any of them, but just as a habit, I always go to the last one. You right click, and then you go to macro and create macro. And you can name this whatever you want. Now, another thing I'll caution you with, if you want to be able to use this as a macro within Fusion, and you want it to automatically label it when you drag it in, then you can't use spaces, because Fusion will pull those spaces out and bunch everything up. So I tend to use underscores in the actual names. And that way, when you use it as a macro within Fusion, you don't have to go in and uncrowd it. Okay, so the first things we're going to want to do is just for a little clarity, we're going to go to our clip one merge, and we're going to open it up, and you'll see where it says foreground. Now, if you just leave this default, then if you're using this as a macro within Fusion, it's just showing you the little input arrows as foregrounds, and you don't know which one is which. Now, if you're using it on your edit tab, you don't have to worry about it, because it'll automatically select the clips appropriately. But in Fusion, if you're going to do some further customizing, then you're going to want to make some changes here. So you just go in here where it's checked, and you change this to something that'll make sense. So in my case, I changed it to FG for foreground, and then clip one. And then we'll do the same thing for our clip two merge. So we'll go into here, and we'll change this to FG and clip two. And then we're going to go to our logo merge at the very end. And, oh, sorry, it's not the logo merge. So we've actually got to use our logo pick trans one that's labeled here, which is a transform node. So here's our logo pick trans. Here's our input. And we're just going to put a space in there, and we're going to add logo pick. So that's just for our own sanity when we go to actually use this as a macro if we want to later on within Fusion. So, okay. And then we're going to go into our screen fill BG, which is our background. So screen fill. And we're going to go down to color here. And now you'll have to make the decision for yourself. If you want to allow somebody to use like a four color gradient or just a simple gradient, then you'll need to turn all of these on. If you're just going to leave it as changing it as a plain flat color, then you only have to turn on the first 5 here. But in my case, I wanted it fully adjustable. So let's turn them all on. And the reason I'm turning these on is where it just says separator there, like bottom right sep. That'll just create a separator line if we turn that check mark on. And then we also need to turn on gradient type so you can select which gradient you're going to use, whether it's going to be simple gradient or 4-color gradient or simple flat color. And then we would just do the same for the rest of them. Now I'm not going to go through and do it all here because, well, you don't need to see that being repeated over and over. But you would just go through the other two as well, your diagonal 1 BG and your diagonal 2 BG. That's just what I labeled them. So we would go in and turn all that stuff on. And then when you close it, it's going to ask you if you want to save it. So you can go yes, and then it's going to bring this up, and it's going to default to the correct area. So you would just go ahead and save it. Now I'm just going to cancel this because I've already got these built. We're going to quit Fusion because to make these available on the Edit tab, you have to quit Fusion, get them in the right location, and then start, you got to quit Resolve. And then you got to restart it after you move the files into the right location and create your package. So we're just going to go back to our Edit tab, and we're going to quit. And now this is where this comes into play. So first thing we're going to do is if you didn't watch my other video, you're going to want to go do that where I explain some of this a little better. But basically the new package handling system in Resolve, you're going to need to go in and create this folder structure. So you have to have this edit folder and then these 4 folders within it. And now in this case, we're going to use transitions. And then you would just copy the macro that you made in here, whatever that is named. You would just copy that over into here. And then, and the same applies if you've made a custom title or you've made a custom effect. You just put them in these appropriate locations. And then you come back out here and you need to zip up this folder recursively. So what do I mean by that? Well, that means that all the files within the folders inside of this folder are going to get included. And you want to make sure that it's going to recreate that structure as well if you were to unzip it. So now we're just, in my case, I can right click it and I can go send to, add to archive. And then I can just go ahead and go OK. And now I just take this edit zip and I name it whatever I want. Now in my case, I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I've created. So I just named it my FD for Fuzzee D full Fusion package. And it's good to keep an extra copy of this. And when you create this as well. So all we're going to do is we're going to take the zip file and we're going to copy it. So I'm going to hit the Control C and then Control V, and then I'm going to take this copy, I'm going to rename it. So I just hit F2, or you can right click and go rename. And then we're going to change this extension to DR, so DaVinci Resolve is what it stands for, Fusion Effects, so DRFX. And it's going to give you a warning. You're going to go yes. And now that is your package. Now you've got one of two ways that you can install this. If you know the path where this is actually going to go, you can just manually copy it in. That's generally what I do because it saves me a step. Because if you install this inside of Fusion, then you would have to quit Fusion and start it up again, like we already did, to get into to have them actually show up in the effects library. Now, if you look at that other video that I did a couple videos ago, I'll put a link up on the top of the screen here for it, so you can view it there. But basically, you would just take this and drag it into a Fusion project, and it'll ask you if you want to install it, and then it'll look after putting it in the appropriate location for you. But if you want to do this manually, you would just come in here and you would back up to templates, and then you'll see where I've actually got it here. So the FD full fusion package.drfx. So you would just take this package that you just created and you would copy it into here. And then when you start up Fusion, it'll be available. So you don't have to actually go through going into Fusion and then dragging it in. So since I don't actually need these, I'm just going to delete them. And then we would fire Fusion back up. Okay, so we're going to bring in a couple little things here. So I'm just going to go grab some footage. So you can grab whatever footage you're going to use. So I can just grab a couple of files here, drag them in, change your frame rate. Okay. Now I'm just going to use a logo that I've already got in my power bin. So we're just going to grab one of these and we're going to stick it on our timeline. I'm just going to turn snapping on here and grab the other one, stick it on the timeline, and now we're just going to scroll down. And oh yeah, you have to go into your toolbox, select video transitions. Effects library has to be open, so if it's not open, you just click on effects library and then go to your toolbox and then video transitions, and then your video transition they'll be available in here, whatever you just made. And we're going to drag it on to here, and you'll notice it doesn't go on because these have to have some overlap. So we're just going to back this one over top a couple of seconds, grab it in the middle, and we'll drag it into 1 second in one frame. There's a reason that we have to do that, but I don't want to get into the explanation here. So then we can grab our transition, we can drop it on the middle, and because we made it 2 seconds, we've got to take this and lengthen it out so that it's actually 2 seconds long. And then you'll see that, we'll just turn off snapping here. If we just scrub past this, you'll see that it's working, but it's not actually showing our logo graphic. And to attach that logo, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go into my power bin and I'm going to grab my logo here, and I'm just going to stick it on there to bring it in my project. I could have drug it directly up to that folder, but it doesn't really matter. So I can delete that again now. So now we're going to right click on this little transition and we're going to go open in Fusion page. And then all we got to do is drag our graphic in. and then drag it onto the only open input that's there. Now, if we were going to be, and that's all you got to do for that, but if you're going to be doing this as a new project in Fusion and you want to bring in your macro that you made, we can just hit the Control space bar. We can hit FD. So click on the one we want. That's the transition. Oh, let's get that off of there. So I'm just holding my shift key down and dragging into it. Excuse me. So I just held my shift key down while I drug it off, so it automatically disconnects it. And we'll just attach it there. So now remember when I was talking about labeling these correctly? So if we just disconnect our media out, bring that over here, and we'll connect this macro to it. And then we can grab our video as a media in. So now if I use my right-hand mouse button and I drag it into here and let go, then it pops up a little menu. So I can now select my FG clip 1. And then I can grab the next media in and do the same thing. Right click, drag, select it to clip 2. And then I would grab another copy of this, bring that in, and then you can just drag it to the one that's remaining. But that's why I went through the trouble when I was building the macro to actually name those correctly. And then you'll see if we run this, the first time through it's a little slower. Now it's playing at full speed, now that it's cached. And that's all there is to it. So we're just going to disconnect that there. I'm going to delete that. And then we'll reconnect our output to media out. And we'll just double check, make sure it's still going to play correctly. Okay, so now we can go back to our edit page. And now when we play it, we get our graphic. So there we go. Now you know how to build an actual video transition and install it into your effects library. Now the other thing you can do, if you're always going to be doing it, you know, as a 2-second, you can right click this and you can go create transition preset. And then you give it whatever name you want. And then if you scroll up to where it says user, then it'll show up here. And because this is a bug, I think, because this isn't supposed to happen. You notice these other presets I've made are still here. I did create presets for this, and they didn't show up when we reopened it. So that's part of the reason I've got these orphaned ones down here that I got to figure out how to delete, because I added them to my favorites. So we'll just go ahead and actually, we'll put it in there. Oh, see, even though it's not showing up in there, it's not letting me put it in. And this is part of the bug that they still have to fix. So we'll just call it something else. So let's call it 1. So now you'll see that we've got it here in the preset. Now, if I was to create another new project and try and drag this in, that logo in the middle there, let's just scroll over it. So this logo here wouldn't be there, and it would actually give a broken link error. It calls it something else, but that's essentially what it is. And it doesn't give you a way to actually relink it, and just dragging the graphic in and making it available in your project doesn't fix it either. So so every time you use this, if you want to have a logo there that's not a SVG file, then you have to right click on it, go into Fusion and attach it. But it only takes a couple seconds, so it's no big deal. I hope you got something useful out of this today. I'm glad you hung out with us, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.